Hey everyone, I'm excited today to have Katarina Polonska with me. Katarina is a high performance coach and founder and creator of the Successfully in Love method. She has a master's degree in gender studies from Oxford. And yeah, I actually came about her because I saw one of her ads for one of her courses on Facebook. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And I bought it. And yeah, it was an amazing course. And we then connected on LinkedIn. And here we are. And so a bit of context in terms of why I'm speaking with a relationship coach in light of what I'm usually up to. Little quick intro about me. I'm Gavin Abaratney, husband, father, and author of an upcoming book called Growing Tall Poppies, which is about my vision for a future Australian republic. And the context of this discussion, my background is also in behavioral studies. I've spent most of my career in marketing, consulting, and strategic communications. And I've found that invariably when working with individuals or teams, no matter what we do tactically in the outer world in terms of all these strategies, people's inner world will come up to either self-sabotage, self-protect, or all sorts of fun stuff like that. And of course, in terms of really good leadership, it's obviously relational, right? There's an element of doing that work yourself, but also how we communicate with others and attachment styles has just been coming up for me this whole year. So I've become very interested in learning from this and very excited to get your thoughts and insights on that, Katarina.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I guess tell me a little bit about your journey because obviously you do relationship coaching for couples, and then you also do executive work. So tell me a little bit about how you sort of got into that kind of thing.
Yeah, great question. And to clarify, I do the relationship coaching for the individuals within relationships, right?
Mm,
So less couples work and more
mm,
working with the individuals.
mm,
I feel so much more effective than bringing two
mm.
people together who have a lot of unhealed wounds and find that they start throwing them at each other, right?
I love that.
Much more effective to work, clear the wounds, and then come together.
I love it.
Um, yeah. So how did I get involved? So where to start? Couple of things. One, I've grown up in the world of psychology. So I'm one of those kids who grew up with a father who was super into personal growth, very immigrant mentality. Like I was born in Slovakia, came to England when I was four.
Oh, cool.
And, my dad, really from a young age, was throwing at me all of the personal development books. Like I think I was 12 years old when I was reading the Tony Robbins stuff, and it was
Mm,
like up in my face. And he was working in that field as well. He's actually an executive coach himself now, and he went on
great.
to work with names like Joe Dispenza and some really kind of big figures. And so that was a lot of my upbringing. And naturally, like a teenager, I resisted and rebelled
Mm.
and didn't like any of it and thought that he was really annoying. And why is he criticizing me? Core wound being shaped right there. And yeah, it was interesting. I kind of knew this stuff, but I resisted it. And it was actually when I was 16 and I developed anorexia and I
Mm,
had kind of eating disorder moment number one because it came back again in my life later. And I got the anorexia. I knew what it was and I knew I shouldn't have it. Like I knew it was a problem. And when I went to the school counselor and I did a bit of counseling, it was free. It was not very helpful at all. And I kind of found myself scouring around, like, what can I do to get rid of this horrific mental disease? Like it was, awful.
mm,
And I went to my parents for help because I had no money of my own. I was 16. And my father was very much of the mindset, I'm not going to pay for you to do therapy or all of this stuff. Like, I'm sure you can figure it out yourself. You're
mm.
smart, you can figure it out. What I will do though is I'll pay for you to do your NLP and hypnotherapy certification as a coach.
Oh,
So because
fantastic.
my dad was like trained to be a coach at the time, he was like, you just become a coach and you'll figure it out. So he took me out of school. I think I took like
Mm,
a month of school at the time. It was a long time. And
mm,
the school didn't know. They thought I was sick. And I embarked on this like deep kind of residential retreat training program, which was amazing with a couple of other women. One of them went on to become one of my best friends. And I learned all about the subconscious mind. I learned all about our limiting beliefs and how they shape our worldview and all of this stuff. And it was, groundbreaking at the time. It didn't cure my anorexia though.
mm.
It did help me with my insomnia because I had
Hey,
insomnia, anorexia.
it's
So
pretty good.
yeah, pretty good. Really helped with that. And that's kind of what got me into this world, like got me on that journey. And
Mm,
I'll never forget kind of pulling it all together and understanding that, oh, the fact my father was absent throughout my life, working really hard and generating revenue for the family, created an abandonment wound, created this anorexia, right? So I kind of understood
mm.
it. I just didn't know how to get rid of it. And for
Mm.
anyone who's had an eating disorder in the past or any kind of addiction, it's really hard to get rid of just by understanding. Like it's not enough, right? It's not
Mm.
enough just to kind of think your way through it. But anyhow, I managed to get it under control and went off to university. At university, I decided to build my first coaching business.
Mm.
And I was coaching students who are older than me on how to get a first class degree, even though
Oh,
I hadn't
cool.
actually graduated myself. Like the audacity.
I love it.
And yeah, I loved it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I remember like kind of commanding this room and giving people these subconscious mind techniques, and it was super cool.
Mm.
And eventually I kind of realized, you know what, I can't build a business and try and get a first class degree myself. I have to focus on
Yeah.
my degree. So I folded it, went on to the world of work, and joined a tech startup, a wine startup, and actually went off to build my own startup in the
Mm.
wine industry. So a very different industry, but kind of still very entrepreneurial.
Mm.
And everything was ticking away fine. You know, I had the anorexia under control. But then one really big triggering event happened. My dad left my mother, and it was
Mm.
completely out of the blue. None of us had expected it. It was, I mean, it was infidelity, and no one saw it coming. So when it did happen, it was a whole collapse of my worldview, right? Because I'd kind of grown up in this very nuclear household, and dad leaving was huge. At the time, I was 22, I think.
Mm.
And for those of you out there who've had your parents divorce at a later age, it's hard. It's
Mm.
actually harder. And I can't say that's a fact, but statistically, a lot of people whose parents divorce later in life
Mm.
struggle and suffer more than if their parents were divorced younger,
Mm.
because there's a lot of pressure on you. You're an adult. People expect you to keep it together to help. I mean, I ended up mediating my parents' divorce,
Mm.
which was a crippling amount of pressure for a 22-year-old woman. It was way too much. And so when that happened, I ended up kind of having my own little breakdown, I guess. I just couldn't deal with the pressure. And I ended up doing something called the Hoffman process, which is a residential retreat
Mm.
in the US. And I did this process, and it's all about kind of cutting ties with your parents
Yeah.
and healing yourself from your parental wounds. It's a super powerful retreat. Did that, went deeper down the train of subconscious mind work and doing all of this. Absolutely loved it. And I will say it did really heal my relationship with my father on a profound level. And I then went off to Dubai and worked for another startup, and the anorexia came back.
Mm.
And my theory, actually, with all of this stuff is that it's almost like the more that I was chipping away at the wounds, the more that they were coming up to be healed. And I
Mm.
think that's kind of one of the main fallacies in healing work, that people think, oh, I do this work and then it's all gone and it's tucked away and I never have to deal with it. No, it actually might come up because it's coming up to be looked at, right?
Mm.
And so for me, the anorexia resurfaced. And this time around, when it came up, I was in my mid-20s, and I was like, this is not happening. I'm not having this in my mid-20s. It's such a waste of my life, such a waste of my time. I was so angry at it that I was like, I'm just going to figure it out once and for all. And I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to heal, because things like 3 out of 4 women actually never recover from anorexia. It's like a
Mm.
lifelong disease. And so at this point, I decided to leave the wine trade, go back to university. I went to Oxford, did gender
Mm.
studies after living in Dubai. It was such kind of an interesting area for me. And I
Mm.
began to study like mental health and well-being across the different genders and the sexes, and looking at how do we actually kind of relate to each other? Where are we more similar than we are different? And where are we actually different? So
Mm.
really beginning to unpack, like, how is it that women like myself can have anorexia and eating disorders and all of these issues with our body? How do these issues shape out in men and masculinity? And so really unpacking all of that. So super interesting. And ultimately, I dove deeper into the subconscious mind work, did successfully recover from anorexia this time around, thank goodness,
Mm.
healed, discovered a lot of different techniques like somatic work, and kind of began to pull it all together and built my own little practice.
Mm.
And then I went to work in behavioral science. And after kind of a brief stint in philanthropy, and it was in behavioral science that I was doing much more corporate work. I was working for a big behavioral science firm. I went on to become a VP there, and I was consulting, big companies on their people strategy, on how to make people happier, on like mental well-being, all these different areas on DE&I, and I loved it. I missed the more one-on-one aspect. So
Mm.
eventually, all of that led me into quitting and building my own executive coaching business,
Mm.
with one caveat.
Mm.
I thought that my executive coaching business was going to be very, helping people with stress and helping people with anxiety and helping people like more high performance. What was actually happening parallel to all of this is I got engaged to my
Mm.
now ex-fiance. And in that process of getting engaged, thinking, this can't be too hard. I've done all this work on myself. Like I've been in this world for so long, right? I grew up in this space. I've done therapy for 15 years. Like I know about subconscious blocks. Like it'll be fine.
Mm.
And got engaged. I figured it's time to settle down, have kids, start a family, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And it wasn't that simple because that's when a load of other, I guess, blocks started to come up. And in the end, as I went deeper and deeper and deeper into my healing, I actually ended up leaving that engagement, recognizing he wasn't the right person for me and I wasn't the right person for him,
Mm.
and going onto my own 11-month adventure of doing healing work around relationships and really,
Mm.
again, being a nerd, understanding the psychology of relationships and understanding attachment theory and really unpacking all of this stuff, which I will say is very different to doing personal development. You can do
Mm.
all personal development in the world. You can meditate, you can become a little, yogi, you can sit on a mountaintop, you can pray, you can do all these incredible things and feel fantastic about yourself.
Mm.
But as soon as you get into a relationship, all of this stuff comes up, right? Like the relational side of things is so different to the personal development side of things.
Yeah.
And most people are focusing on the personal and
Mm.
assuming that if they have a therapist and if they're just talking about their issues and self-aware, everything's going to be fine. So all of that to say, that's essentially what got me passionate about the relationship stuff. And as I began working with executives, I realized everyone's got issues with their relationships.
Mm.
Every single freaking executive I worked with.
Mm.
And I was like, this is madness. Like, why is everyone suffering? I was
No, this
suffering,
is
my
Sparta.
parents were suffering. Yeah. And so that's what really made me kind of hone in, train, deepen my own knowledge base, build my own methodology, including the subconscious mind work,
Mm.
and help people heal from their relational blocks. That was a really long answer. And I always answer a really long answer to that question. I'm sorry. I hope
No,
it's
no,
okay though.
no, not at all. Nothing to apologize for. I think that's great. I'm trying to keep track of the threads.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love all of that, and I mean, there's a lot of fascinating stuff in there. I think it would have been an amazing experience to live in Dubai and then go study gender at Oxford. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, maybe we'll talk about that another time. But I want to go back to what we first talked about when you just said then, and that it's I think that's quite profound, right? That you're saying that the more effective way to heal one's relationship is to focus on your individual,
Yeah.
relationship and self alchemy and this kind of stuff, if you will, and then heal those wounds and then go back into relationship. And you also said that personal development isn't necessarily the answer because we see this all the time. People do a lot of personal development and then being able to sit and be in equanimity on the cushion is very different from being able to do that in the real world, and certainly relationships are a real gauntlet for that. So then, what is the difference then between conventional personal development and then what it is you would sort of help people do to heal their own relational wounding?
Yeah, really good question. When people, or I shouldn't say when people, what I see in my experience when people are doing a lot of their own personal growth is that there's a lot of focus on dealing with anxiety,
Mm.
dealing with stress, getting to know your value system, getting to know, who you are, and kind of learning to still your mind, quieten your mind, meditate, all these really lovely practices to help you be more at peace with yourself and get
Mm.
more clarity on where do you actually want to go in your life in terms of your career and your kind of personal fulfillment, your goals, et cetera, right?
Mm.
All of that, you're kind of free to go and achieve whatever you want to achieve. There's no one really getting in your way so much, and there's no one around to trigger you so much. If you
Mm.
have anxiety, for example, a lot of that anxiety will be performance anxiety, or maybe you're getting stressed about an exam, or maybe whatever it might be. But it's the kind of thing that you have a lot of control over,
Mm.
actually. And you can actually, I mean, I see this with a lot of the single folks. I work with plenty of single people too.
Mm.
You can separate yourself, you can remove yourself from triggering situations, you can cocoon yourself and build your own life and your own setup that works really well for you and actually does allow you to be very successful and
Mm.
does allow you to achieve wonderful things. As soon as you bring in a partner into that and you drop down into a place of vulnerability and love, and your heart opens up, and someone else is connecting and interacting with you in that space,
Mm,
all of your triggers, all of your wounds, all of your, I'm going to say demons, but I don't even like that term, but all
mm,
of the unhealed parts that you might gloss over and not even see within yourself because we have our own blind spots, right? They're called blind spots for a reason.
mm,
They will get triggered and activated and they will come out, right? It's almost like when you're in a relationship, you're with a mirror to yourself that you cannot run from. And the parts of yourself that you might want to ignore or deny or not think about or not worry about and just, meditate and focus on X, Y, and Z, they get triggered and provoked to come up. And so I always say doing the single work to get into a healthy relationship or a high functioning relationship is one part of the journey. That's the part where you are doing that work and you're trying to build this self-awareness and trying to get to know what you need, et cetera, et cetera. Once you're in the relationship, there's another whole load of work to be done. And so in the work that I like to do with people, I'm
mm,
almost taking the relational part and letting or empowering singles to do it before they even get into that relationship. So like, let's clear your stuff out now
mm.
so that you're performing at your best and you're most prepared to get into that relationship. Of course, stuff's going to come up, but let's equip you so that you come well equipped. And for people in relationship, it's like, okay, let's take you out of this ultra triggering dynamic where you're hoping someone to change with you, and you're feeling triggered and you're trying to control them and you're pointing the blame at them and all of like these kind of very relational dynamics. And let's look
Mm.
at how they play out with you. It's like symbiotic dynamic, right? Where you're going to get triggered by other people, but you want to be doing the work on your own so that when you come back to them, you can manage your triggers so much better.
Got it. Got it. I love that. Yeah, it's funny. I feel as though the next evolution of the personal development industry would probably be called interpersonal development, which is maybe a more accurate
Yeah,
way of describing
yeah,
things. Um,
exactly.
okay, fantastic. So then let's talk about this relationship with the self, because I think in your course you mentioned that like all of your outer world relationships are ultimately a relationship with yourself. And the stuff that's come up for me over this last year is how people will have, myself included for that matter, various attachment styles, avoidant or anxious avoidant or anxious and all these kind of things. And also something that's come up, you mentioned somatic, is something called a nourishment threshold, which
Mhm.
is where, I think Gay Hendricks talked about it, called an upper limit. In personal development, they call it like a wealth thermostat or whatever it is. But there's essentially like a
Yeah.
level of receptivity where after you go beyond that, it starts to feel like, oh, something's being triggered. This starts to feel unsafe or whatever it is. And it's just sort of struck me that, and I'd love your thoughts on this. And if you think I'm totally off, then by all means, call it. It's like a lot of what we sort of claim as self-protection, self-sabotage appears to be some sort of self-protection, some sort of perverse thing going on there. Is that sort of your experience in dealing with that, or have you had any experience with helping people overcome
Yeah.
that?
So your question is self-sabotage a form of self-protection?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would, yes, to an extent. I would
Mm,
move away from the language of protection though, and move to the language of getting your needs met, right?
mm,
Your your subconscious mind is very, very smart. It's not trying to hurt you. It's not trying to cause problems for you. Yeah, it's trying to protect you, but even protecting you is actually a deeper need that's trying to get met, right? It's safety. And
mm,
so your subconscious mind, at every single given second that you're alive and functioning, is trying to get your needs met. That's literally its job. And so if you find yourself subconsciously doing things that aren't working, when I say subconscious, I just mean like you're not aware of them. Maybe you're trying to stay calm in a conflict with your partner and you find yourself raising your voice and then getting really activated and then kind of gesticulating and then getting like angry and upset and then maybe
mm,
crying and then collapsing,
mm,
and you can't seem to stop that. You don't want to do that. You want to stay controlled and centered and measured, but that keeps happening.
mm,
That's not self-sabotage, or rather it is self-sabotage in the kind of conventional sense of
mm,
the word. And I guess it is you trying to protect yourself. What I find more helpful is
mm,
to recognize that it's literally just your unconscious, subconscious ways of trying to get your needs met. Maybe it's your
mm,
need to get heard, right? And so from childhood that actually if you cry and if you start to maybe have a bit of a tantrum or raise your voice,
mm.
you will get more attention, you will get heard, people will stop, they will come to you,
Got
right?
it.
So equally, like I literally have I mean, actually, I have this with my husband. We have
Mm,
very different mechanisms for like our conflict styles, right? He will get louder and more animated, which is tapping into his wounds around not feeling seen and heard.
mm,
And what he would have learned from childhood is that the louder he gets and the more he kind of flaps his arms around, the more people are going to come to him. For
mm,
me, crying. Crying
mm,
was always the way, right? If I start
mm,
crying, everyone will stop yelling at me. They'll come to me and give me love and connection,
mm,
right? They'll start to soothe. So yes, it's a safety mechanism. Um, but it's more, I prefer to almost think about like the reason I prefer to think about it as like the way we're getting our needs met is it's a much richer vocabulary
mm,
because in many ways everything we're doing is safety, right? Like
mm.
kind of everything we're doing is safety, but that's not
Yeah.
all helpful. What's more helpful is to look at what need is getting met
Mm,
by this behavior that maybe isn't working for me, right? So if you find yourself, again, I have clients who have like pornography addictions, or clients have
mm,
alcohol addictions, or
mm,
drug addictions. Like I work with a lot of addictions. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're self-sabotaging. It's just a maladaptive way of getting their fundamental needs met,
mm,
right? There's going to be stories in them that are telling them that this is actually the most effective way. And that probably is coming from childhood. It's
mm,
not the most effective way, clearly, because it's actually not helping your life. So
mm,
let's unpack that story, identify what are you actually trying to get out of this experience, and let's find a new and more productive way of getting that experience for you, right? Getting that
mm.
need met. Does
I
that
love
all make
that.
sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that is, yeah, much richer language and much more functional language just to go into that. So I guess then, is that the heart of what it is you help people do? Just own what they actually need and get clear on what they need so they don't have to have the maladaptive methods come online to get
Yeah,
those needs met?
partly. I think that's one of the kind of four prongs that I do.
Hmm,
If I was to kind of distill what I really do, and I'm going to speak specifically to people who are in relationship, though again, I work with plenty of singles. Working with singles is almost easier because
hmm,
it's the journey of working with a single person is really helping them identify what is getting in the way of them finding healthy love. Like,
hmm,
why has it not worked before? Like, what's the block?
hmm,
Overcoming those blocks, right? It's going to be more than one, 9 times out of 10. Overcoming those blocks, getting clear on what they actually need to be happy long term, and then creating good strategies to get that done, right? With people who are in a relationship, the bigger question is what I typically see, what what is going on in the relationship right now insofar as where am I not seeing things clearly? Where am I actually viewing my partner from a lens of projection and wounding? And
hmm,
that's what's upsetting me versus what are they actually doing that is actually destructive to the relationship?
hmm,
And that's actually the problem, right? So kind of discerning to what extent is it me and my projection, and to what extent is it actually what's happening? That's a
hmm,
really big one.
hmm,
Then when you identify what it is that's you, which there will
hmm,
be for everyone some part of this, right?
hmm,
How can we overcome that coming from the wounded place? How can we overcome those different blocks that are actually making those behaviors happen? And how can we actually identify what is the need beneath those behaviors? How can we actually develop more self-trust with you so that you trust yourself and trust your behaviors and trust your needs and trust your boundaries and trust what you have to say so that you show up in a much more grounded, centered way? And then how can we actually, kind of circling back to the partner, create strategies to make things work in a much more loving, connected, intimate, and safe way with your partner? So it's kind of like we start looking at the two of you, drop down to look at like what can you do to clear up your side of the street, and then
hmm,
kind of circle back to the partner, right? And all of that together will inherently always change the dynamic of the relationship. And
hmm,
again, 9 times out of 10, it will improve the relationship quite drastically because your partner will receive a very different version of you.
hmm. No, I love that. Um, well, yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I guess in partnership and in relationship, all the transference and all that stuff comes online, right? We start projecting all of
Yeah.
the childhood wounds. And so, how do you help people identify what is true and what is a projection, or where that sort of spectrum is? Because I think that's quite challenging, especially when you're in a trigger and you're in that sort of activated state. Like, how do you know whether what you're seeing is a delete, distort, or generalize, to use the NLP terminology?
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to come down to being very client specific, right? Which is why like most of my work is actually client led.
Mm,
There's going to be an understanding of what are the client's thought processes around what they're experiencing, what are the
mm,
stories
got it.
in their like what stories going on in um again, what are the interpretations of what they're seeing.
Mm.
And then also there needs to be an understanding of what is, I haven't actually figured out how to phrase this, but like, what's the science of a secure, healthy, again, I don't even like the term healthy, but like
Mm.
secure relation. What does that look like?
Mm.
Right? Because everyone's going to be different. And at the same time, there are certain foundational truths, I believe personally, of what it is to be in a secure, loving, safe relationship. And
Mm.
so we want to be unpacking what's actually happening in that relationship, which really just comes down to speaking to the client and getting to kind of understand the situation. And where are there distortions and where are there stories being told? And how much of that is maladaptive and how much of that is actually an accurate representation, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the tricky part of my work, I'm normally only getting one side of the story, right? I'm
Mm.
not there with the other partner.
Yeah.
However, based on the language, based on what I hear from that client, based on their
Mm.
interpretation, that's almost always enough
Mm.
to improve the situation anyway.
Yeah.
Because there is no objective reality in relationship,
Yes.
really, right? Unless the
My
client
truth,
is
your truth, and the truth somewhere in
totally,
between. Yeah.
totally. And unless the client is literally lying through their teeth
Mm.
and presenting a very different reality to me to what's actually going on, which I don't know why they would be doing that and why they'd be paying me to work for them, because that'd be a really odd thing to do.
Yeah.
I kind of have to take their word for it, though, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of ways to tell. There's a lot of ways, and I guess a lot of it just comes down to experience of
Yeah, totally.
hearing this a lot, right?
Yeah. Well, this is it. And this is why I think, yeah, working with someone like yourself is such a, um, yeah, such a no-brainer for someone who's experiencing those
Mhm.
situations and wants someone to call it. So that's awesome. Um, well, yeah, that's really fascinating. I guess the other, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really
Yeah, welcome.
useful and very practical as well. So the other thread I wanted to pull on, which I thought was fascinating, is you mentioned gender dynamics and
Mm.
how things showed up differently for men and women when these sorts of triggers happen. So yeah, what sort of insights came through from that? What I guess you did your masters. Did you write any papers on that, or you mentioned you were
Yeah,
peer reviewed and something? So what was the big insight that came through
yeah,
in terms of that for masculinity and femininity?
yeah, totally. And when I talk about masculine and feminine, there's kind of like two lenses that I look at it, right?
Hmm.
You've got the gender angle, which is actually kind of the gender roles that we play in society. And then you've got the masculine and feminine energies, which are
Yes.
actually nothing to do with the gender. But
Yes.
yeah, I think we've talked about this, right? The English language is like very ill-equipped for this.
Well,
And
yeah,
they're kind
in German and Spanish and all these other languages, everything's gendered and it's a hermetic principle.
of
I'm sure you've
totally,
heard of. Yeah.
totally. But it's nothing to do with the actual gender. Like
Yeah.
like I don't know, French table. I don't know the let or the lab, but like it's nothing to do with the gender. Like the table's
Yes.
not a woman or a man, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I guess kind of like a first qualifier is that I always think about things on three different levels. You
Mm.
have the biological sex, which is your
Mm.
organs and what you're kind of born with. Some
Mm.
studies say there are actually five sexes out there. I mean, all of that.
Mm.
There's lots and lots of research on that. Whatever you want to call it, there's
Mm.
sex, that's your biological like anatomy, I
Organs.
guess.
Anatomy. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you have your gender, which is the societal role that you end up being conditioned into. That's going to be partly influenced by your biology, right? So
Mm.
again, there's kind of a lot of studies to show that it's not as black and white as you are a man and you are inherently masculine by gender. Like everyone's going to be
Mm.
on a little bit of a spectrum, right? So that's
Mm.
typically kind of conditioned and learned.
Mm.
And then you have the different energies. And we have what we call in the English language masculinity and femininity. And unfortunately, those have really limited terms because masculine energy sounds like it should be for the male, right? But it's actually not necessarily to do with that because every single human being will have a blend of masculine and feminine energies within them. What
Mm.
matters more is which one do you feel most kind of rested in, which could be linked to your biology. There's still not that
Mm.
many studies on that to actually prove that. So I
Mm.
always just like to say it doesn't really matter. What matters more is which one brings you more joy and which one are you using when, right? So when we're talking
Mm.
about masculine and feminine energies, there's going to be different energies you want to bring to different situations that feel good to you. When I'm working and I'm, firing through like my deliverables, I'm very much in my masculine energy, and that feels really
Mm.
good and go-getting and productive and kind of disciplined and structured and on it. But when
mm,
I'm with a client, I might be dropping into my feminine energy here and there to empathize with them, but then going back to my masculine to hold space with them, especially if there are tears or a lot of emotions, right? I want to be holding that structure and container for them.
mm,
So the energies are these kind of things that we have inside of ourselves, and we all have a blend of the two. And you get to decide what works best for you. What I find typically is that most people don't know what works best for them. They
mm,
think, I have to be my feminine and I have to be masculine because I'm a man or I'm a woman. And they almost kind of coerce themselves into these different, I guess, roles, these gender roles, and then chop off a whole half of who they really are
mm,
and end up kind of forcing themselves into it. So, what I was actually looking at Oxford from their gender studies, I was looking at why why is masculinity so, and I was looking specifically like white American masculinity,
mm,
why is there such a high rates of violence and sexual violence amongst white American men? That was like actually
mm,
my thesis.
mm,
And I was unpacking the mental health around that. And really what I unpacked was like, oh, well, it's toxic masculinity, surprise for us there. But
mm,
actually, what even is toxic masculinity? Toxic masculinity is actually the very problem I just described. It's when we take a gender identity, which is being a male or
mm,
acting male, and we associate an energy, the masculine energy, with that. We don't allow for any feminine energy, and you are relegated into one very two-dimensional way of being, which is the
mm,
ultra hyper masculine. And that would
mm,
mean that the only emotion you're allowed to express is anger. You're constantly having to do and be productive. You're not allowed to stop and to be, right? And all of that is chopping off a whole spectrum of your identity, a whole spectrum
mm,
of who you are fundamentally, that's repressing you, stifling you. So, of course, you're going to be resorting to outbursts. Stuff's going to be coming out. And if the only
mm,
emotion that you're allowed to express is anger, then it's
mm,
going to translate to violence, right? So,
mm,
I also looked at toxic femininity, which is
mm,
the very same thing. It's where women who are females, right, from a gender identity perspective, have been kind of relegated into a very feminine role, which is actually very infantilized. It's very kind of
mm,
passive.
mhm,
There's no go-getting energy. There's no
mm,
discipline, right? So kind of the very
mm,
classic, I guess, feminine energy female taken to its
mm,
toxic extreme. I actually knew a woman
mhm,
like this in Vancouver, where I currently
mm,
am.
mm.
They're like terrible with their finances. They're very dependent. They're almost very childlike, and they're desperately looking to be rescued by a man, right?
Mm,
That's again very
mm.
toxic because you're kind of disowning this wonderful part of yourself that
Yeah,
maybe does actually want to have a project and a passion and
yeah,
and be able to provide for your kids and look after your husband, right?
yeah.
So really that's kind of what I talk about. And when I talk about that in my work, again, I'm always looking at two levels. Like, where are you constricting yourself from a gender dynamics, gender role perspective? And I
Mm.
see that in dating a lot of the time when people are like, especially women will come to me and they're like, oh, I want a breadwinning male who is going to be 6'6" and earning X amount of money and blah 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 blah. Because I
Yeah.
want him to be masculine, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, there are so many things to unpack here that are wrong with this, are so limited, that are so limited.
Yeah.
And from their own energy perspective, they're like, I have to be in my divine feminine, which I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, if you're an ambitious CEO female, own it.
Yeah.
If it brings you joy, own it.
Yeah.
You probably just need more balance in your life.
Mm.
Don't need to be running around tantra circles, writhing around on the floor, doing orgasmic things. Like you can, but it doesn't have to be so extreme, right? There's
Mm.
something about own your humanity,
Mm.
own his humanity, find the balance and the configuration that works for you,
Mm.
whatever that might look like. And that's going to require some self-exploration, and craft a life for yourself where you get your needs met.
Mm.
It's, like I can talk about this for days and I'm not going to do that. But
Well, it's
there's a
it's
lot of like,
11:11, so I have to go to my tantra circle right now because it's
oh,
11:11.
sorry. Again,
Spirit
nothing
numbers.
wrong with that. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that,
No, of
right?
course
There is
not.
nothing wrong with
No.
that. It's
Well,
just, it's not the silver bullet.
not the silver bullet. Okay. Well, this is awesome. So I've got an interesting. First of all, yeah, that's all amazing. I love all that. And I got a funny question for you. Can a
Mm.
biologically female female anatomy woman be
Yeah.
living in a toxic masculinity paradigm, or like be acting in a toxic masculine kind of way?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because patriarchy is a real thing, right? So again, what I see a lot of is,
Sorry,
and I think
I'll
this
pause
is
you.
where the problem kind of,
Sorry, and then vice versa. Can a biological male be in a overly quote unquote feminine um, energy and therefore be looking for someone else to rescue him, which might actually be a masculine woman?
yeah, 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 100%. And just kind of to the masculine woman. And again, I think this is kind of where a lot of the problems have originated. Because typically what's happening, right, from a social science point of view,
Hmm.
there's a lot of complexities going on. And as like media and pop culture tries to make sense of it, they oversimplify it,
Hmm.
right? And then they create these kind of caricatures of here's what's going on.
Hmm.
And actually what's really going on is a lot more complex than that. And so
Tell me, yeah.
we know that we know that patriarchy is a thing, right? We know that
Hmm.
we do live in a hyper masculine world,
Hmm.
largely because, I mean, let's not go into all the reasons for that, but
Yeah.
from a kind of energies and values perspective,
Hmm.
what capitalism values is the more masculine from an energy perspective
Hmm.
qualities, right? Of producing, of doing, of discipline, of go-getting, of being very rational, of being very structured. These are all very kind of, from an energy perspective, masculine qualities.
Hmm.
And that's what society values, right? That's kind of what makes capitalism go around.
Hmm.
We're less we're valuing much less like emotions and creativity and softness and all these different things. And so that's been already conflated with gender roles. So we have more men, obviously, in positions of power.
Hmm.
But from a kind of women's gender dynamics point of view, what will happen there is that you can have a woman like myself, I'll use myself as an example,
Sure.
who gets out into the workforce. And to succeed in that workforce, I observe that, okay, well, to show up, I have to be disciplined, structured, on time, work hard, go getting, ignore my own kind of biological bodily rhythms of like, I don't know, PMS, whatever it might be, because like, oh, no, that's going to get in the way of production, like push it all
Hmm.
down, push it down. So I go into my own kind of very masculine energy,
Hmm.
right? Even though I have female organs, but the society that I'm in is conditioning me to be very masculine in terms of the way that I am, in terms of
Hmm.
my energy and my value system. And so then I go into that, and that's where you get that kind of stereotype of like the very masculine female, right?
Hmm.
And that's where, when I look into the polarity teachings,
Hmm.
so much of that world is about, well, then try not to be so masculine,
Hmm.
show up into your work and try to make your work more feminine or bring in more of that feminine energy. And that's also where I think it gets really wrong, because then
Hmm.
we're kind of conflating the genders, right? We're making it about the gender identity. There is
Hmm.
nothing wrong with bringing discipline and structure into your work. Again, it's just about finding balance, finding what works for you. But
Hmm.
very often, so I'm going off on a tangent here,
No, not at
the
all.
women will end
No.
up in that masculine energy.
Yeah.
And what will happen, and kind of as a reaction to that, and this has happened socially, and specifically, this happened a lot in the 1980s and 1970s.
Hmm.
If the woman is out there being more ultra masculine in the workspace and she's having to kind of adopt these more masculine values,
Hmm.
and the man is suddenly feeling, well, I can't compete with her because affirmative action, she's going to go and earn more money than me, or she's going to get more academic credentials than me.
Hmm.
There becomes this, and again, this is kind of a social phenomenon, there becomes this kind of like victimhood
Hmm.
energy of like, well, what's the point? I'm not even going
Hmm.
to try. And
Hmm.
it can often show up as this kind of a backlash energy of like, I do, because
Go
I've
for
seen
it.
this happen,
Call it.
right?
Yeah,
And
call it.
it's harsh to say, but this energy of like, well, fuck this then. I'm just gonna stay here, and like she can be the breadwinner. She can go and do
Hmm.
this, right? That
Hmm.
energy actually comes from a deeper social phenomenon of this culture of entitlement that
Hmm.
actually, if we trace it back to,
Go
I
for
don't
it.
know, sorry,
Go for
if
it. I
we
love
trace this
it.
back to like, if we trace this back to like, I guess kind of the American dream, right? This idea
Hmm.
that you can be born and you can go and live your life, and eventually you'll own your lovely big house with your white picket fence, and you'll have the lovely wife, and you'll have the family, and the money will flow, and you can go and
Hmm.
build your passion and have your dream. Like that's still something that's really sold to us.
Hmm.
But actually, that's like borderline impossible in the
Mm,
economy that we're currently in the world that we're in. Like that's really hard to do. It's not a
mm,
guarantee. It's not even a guarantee that you're going to get a freaking home, right?
mm,
For a lot of people. So when you see that actually women, quote unquote women, are out there and being really masculine and really succeeding, the kind of the subtext backlash can be one of, well, why am I even going to try? Like, clearly this isn't going to work anymore. And
mm,
that's where this kind of more feminization can kick in. But it's again, it's not about the gendered femininity, right? It's just that energy of I'm just going to stay home, I'm going to be soft, I'm going to be receiving more.
mm,
And I do see that a lot with plenty of my clients that they work with a very strong, I guess strong, ambitious, high achieving woman who they
mm,
deem to be very masculine.
mm,
And rather than thinking, well, this is fantastic, we can both find a way to make this work, it's going to require a bit of a new fit of how this is going to work. But there's
mm,
this kind of like surrender response to it of,
mm,
well, what's the point? I'm not going to fight her because we've been conditioned to think it's a competition. It's not a
mm.
competition though,
What is it?
right? It's just a different amalgamate, a different kind of formation
Mm.
of the energies. I find it so hard to have this conversation without having better terminology.
Yeah.
Like the fact
We
that it's,
use,
masculine and feminine energy, it's like, well, it doesn't help, right? Because that
yeah. Well, we use yin and yang
doesn't help.
sometimes.
Absolutely. But even that's kind of been gendered, I think.
Mm.
Sometimes I literally just call it like energy A and energy B, right?
Yeah.
If we if as a society we valorize energy A, and
Mm.
energy A is what makes society run because it's all about production and go-getting and being strong and efficient and blah, 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 and productivity. And
Mm.
energy A is a thing. And both men and women are learning that energy A is what makes the world go round. And so they're both in energy A. That doesn't mean they can't be together. That's kind of
Mm.
bananas to think you can't be together, right? So
Mm.
weird. Of course, you can be in a relationship together. It just means you're both going to have to find ways to integrate energy B into your relationship that works for you,
Mm.
right? And it might be that, yeah, when it comes to being together and being at home, you're both in a little bit more energy B. And actually, one of you will step up and be more in energy A at one point, and one of you will be in energy A at another point, and you find your own kind
Mm.
of configuration of what works,
Mm.
right? But it's not going to necessarily look as clear cut as, well, energy A is when we're out at work and energy B is when we're both at home. There needs to be like a kind of a modernization of
Mm.
what that arrangement looks like, which is why in all the work that I do, I always bring it back to looking at what do you need? Like, what are your needs?
Mm.
Right? Because actually, we're all quite similar in many ways. And the different energies, like the energy A, energy B, they
Mm.
most play out in the bedroom, in sexuality, in
Mhm.
intimacy. That's where
Mm.
they really fire up as kind of
Mm.
having their own kind of potency. And that's fine, but you can't start there to fix the relationship.
Mm. Interesting.
Like
Interesting.
looking at what's going on in the bedroom isn't going to fix the relationship. It's just not. That's
Mm.
myth.
Controversial
Yeah,
take.
that's, we can talk
Controversial
about that.
take.
Sure.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, it's as I said, I missed my tantra circle, but they would have said it's not something good from tantra or that sort of world. Not that I'm particularly yeah into in that world, but it's ritual, right? It's like the when you go into, as you
yeah,
say, into the
absolutely.
bedroom to bring into a ritual where it's like a conscious descent into different polarities or different dynamics.
Sure,
And
sure,
I think yeah, that's probably also true in the BDSM world, which is all about dominance and submission, which is maybe
sure,
another way to
sure,
look
sure,
at
sure.
those energies, right? In terms of dominant and all this kind of jazz. And yeah, it works in both directions, right? In that space and frame as well. So yeah,
Absolutely.
have you ever
But
read
it's
a
not
book
going to be
called
the silver bullet.
Not Gonna Be a
I
Silver
guess it's what
Bullet?
I'm getting at. Like, it's not going to be the only thing to save the relationship. And
Yeah.
again, I just say that because so many people I work with come to me with having spent tens of thousands of dollars on different polarity principles and
Mm,
tantra and breath work and like sexuality and whatever it might be. And that's all fantastic. That's all really, really good stuff. I'm not saying it's not, absolutely. Go
mm,
find what works for you and go tap into the energies that bring you life and bring you joy. What I'm
mm,
saying is that when it comes to actually relating with your partner, you need to get the basic foundations in place, right?
Mm.
Even if you think about like David Data, who I trained under for a while,
Oh
it's
yeah.
like talking about stage two, right? Like you want to get the stage two in place before you go to stage three. You can't just try to dive into stage three because stage three isn't going to have any foundation. You
Hmm.
need to know how to communicate with each other. You need to know how to manage your own triggers. You need to know the principles of how do we actually navigate life where we have kids and we have jobs and we're both in energy A out in the
Mm.
workspace every day and we're both coming home tired. We both want to be in a bit of energy B. And how
Mm.
do we navigate these kind of very real practicalities before we dive into, and the shadow work can be part of that practicalities,
Mm.
absolutely, right? You mentioned BDSM. That can all
Mm.
be part of discovering that. What I'm saying is kind of fast tracking to the really sexy fun stuff of let's look at kind of conscious intimacy and let's look
Mm.
at, really connecting in the bedroom and play and all of that. That's not going to be the silver bullet to
Mm.
figuring out the other more, to be honest, other more kind of mundane stuff, the more
Mm.
vulnerable stuff, the more sensitive stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's really interesting. So what is the more vulnerable stuff, if not, so
yeah.
because what we see, well, certainly what I've been seeing a lot this last year is, guilt, shame, and dogma around
Mhm.
needs,
Mhm.
manifesting as unwilling to be able to express those needs, and that's across the board from, what stuff I've worked through, stuff I've seen with other men, other women. Like, is that what you mean when you say it's like the foundation of a relationship is actually the ability to be intimate and vulnerable, and then sexuality is then where you actually get to practice the needs that you've articulated because you've felt vulnerable or intimate enough to actually express them? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. And maybe we're kind of actually saying the same thing. I'm
Hmm.
curious about that. What I'm referring to about the kind of the foundational practices, it's connecting to the humanity of who you are and
Hmm.
who your wife is or who your partner is, right? On a fundamental level, as human beings who are in relationship, we are more similar than we are not.
Hmm.
And that's something that gets really missed in a lot of the kind of gender politics stuff. If you actually strip it down, and again, you look at biology and you look at emotions and you look at how we experience love, how we experience fear, how we experience our childhoods, how we experience our core wounds, subconscious work, all this stuff, it's all pretty much the same. And
Hmm.
actually, the childhood traumas and wounding and fears and all that, it's going to be very similar. And the way that we actually like to be communicated to, right? Yes, language is very gendered, a lot of that's socially conditioned. When
Hmm.
it comes to things like respect and being heard and being seen, these are going to be pretty much very similar. And so, what I'm talking about is building this kind of foundation of intimacy where you see yourselves in each other and you get each other and you have that deep kind of like bedrock of trust of
Hmm.
I see myself in you and you see yourself in
Hmm.
me and we get each other. And
Hmm.
that's the foundation. And then on top of that, then we can go and play. Then
Hmm.
we can go and kind of play and lean into different energies. And maybe I can be masculine one night or I can be feminine the other night. And we can kind of lean into different spaces and
Hmm.
explore the spectrum of what it is to be human, right?
Hmm.
Of the range of possibility for us.
Hmm.
Absolutely. If you just try to bypass the foundational piece, though, of connecting on that more human, vulnerable kind of, it's not even simple, but
Spiritual.
like, it's kind of less sexy, though.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, it is spiritual. It's just hard. Like, it's hard being human. It's hard.
Hmm.
We go through so much to evolve into the people that we are. And there is so much baggage that we all carry. And there is so much sensitivity and vulnerability into the makeup of what we are. And the deepest love and intimacy that I see in couples comes down to really seeing and hearing and understanding that of each other and having a common ground upon which they can walk, right? Of how we communicate, of how we trust each other, of how we relate to each other, how we share with each other, how we respect each other, our boundaries together. Those foundations, which, yeah, they're not very sexy, but they're
Hmm.
fundamental. And only once you have that can you dive into the more kind of playful sexual stuff. And
Hmm.
what I often see, and I guess this is why I have such a qualm with polarity work. And don't get me wrong, again, like
Hmm.
my own relationship teacher was like a polarity teacher.
Hmm.
But like if we try to bypass and dive into just doing the polarity stuff, and
Mm,
just doing Tantra, and we miss the foundational safety pieces,
mm,
it's very superficial.
mm,
And I see this again in dating culture, right? People try to be all up in their feminine and kind of bring that like feminine energy to the dates. You're just manipulating someone into being with
mm,
you. There's no depth to it. It's not going to last. It's not going to last. You can fake it and create this kind of artificial intimacy by bending yourself out of shape to take on certain energies and show up in a certain way. Again,
mm,
if you don't have that foundational piece, it doesn't have legs to stand on, that's the icing on the cake,
mm.
right? It's kind of like saying like you kind of have to be best friends before you can have that lover's energy. Otherwise, it's just like a sexy affair, which isn't really going to go anywhere, right? It's going to fall apart when the going gets tough. So this is kind of my philosophy that I haven't seen it to work when this is kind of like it's not even spiritual bypassing, is it? It's like I don't even know, vulnerability bypassing.
Really
And not to say that
bypassing.
the
Yeah,
sexuality stuff can't be vulnerable. Absolutely, it is
sure.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely, it is vulnerable. And it can also be dangerous too, right? So many women, especially in the coaching space,
Mm,
I see it all the time. So many women will sign up to, quite frankly, pretty dangerous femininity, polarity teachers who
mm,
are online. They're doing like, honestly, quite weird stuff where
mm.
you're in a room with random women and you're all like, whatever, using your wand and trying to achieve new pinnacles of orgasmic heights. And it's like, I get the theory. This feels very unsafe for a woman's nervous system who
Agree.
hasn't done the foundational healing work on her relationship with herself, right? And that's where you're really preying on someone's vulnerabilities. And yeah, it's vulnerable, but it's not got foundations. It can do a lot more harm than good. In the
Wow.
same way, two people can meet at a tantra group and have, a profound tantric connection. There's no foundation. It's going to be tricky to go anywhere. So that was my soapbox. Sorry, just
No,
going off on a
no,
rant there.
nothing to apologize for.
Yeah.
I mean, part of what I love to do is, yeah, it's like help people who've got incredible messages and often contrarian theses, contrarian messages,
Mm.
or nuanced messages, certainly, evolve the state of their industry. And you've clearly committed to incredible mastery in this, and you've clearly got some, yeah, great teachings. That I'm really glad we got to that because I think it's important to
Yeah.
it's important to do it. Like that's really what this is about to sort of push this stuff forward. So, well, what an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So welcome. I hope, yeah, I hope I didn't kind of like poo-poo the polarity stuff too much. I'm
No,
not
not at
trying to.
all. Not at all. I mean,
Yeah, not
there's
trying to.
there's always grains of truth in this, right? And it's like you said, you can
Yeah.
bypass this stuff, and it's like if it was just as simple as eye gazing for 10 minutes and all this kind of stuff, like you know, tantra workshops would be a done deal. But there's a lot of shadow, there's a lot of stuff going on. I
Yeah.
really respect you've taken the time and energy to sort of look at all these different modalities and different ways of looking at things to bring some nuance to it. And I think it's really great to have a strong female voice in this sector as well, because it's a lot of the time, yeah, it seems like dudes with issues teaching polarity as well, So
Yeah.
so that's
Well, that's the
fantastic.
thing. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
go on,
You're
tell
so
me.
yeah, yeah. And no, I was just gonna say, like, I think that is a lot of the problem with it, right? When I was doing my own kind of going down the rabbit hole of polarity work and like I'll be very candid. I was engaged. The engagement wasn't going well.
Hmm,
I think maybe I've been told the story. And I thought, is it me? Am I too masculine? I'm like the
hmm,
breadwinner in this relationship, and maybe I'm too masculine.
hmm,
And I got it into my head that that was the problem. And so my journey, this is probably about 6 or 7 years ago, was to go down the rabbit hole of feminine kind of polarity work. And I absolutely met some incredible teachers. And, one of them I did end up working with for a long time.
hmm,
That being said, I did run into some like pretty poor teachers who, when I actually broke it down, I was like, well, you're not happily married or in a happy long-term relationship. There's a there's this kind of like, and if you are in a relationship, there's this kind of very, to me, it felt really exploitative.
hmm,
These there were certain women who were parading themselves around the fact that like they don't work, though you're a coach, so you clearly are working, right? And you're
hmm,
charging a lot, so don't act like you don't work. There was this kind of incongruity with what was being said and the message and kind of what lay beneath the substance of it. I didn't see many healthy, happy relationships.
Mm.
I didn't see many high functioning, secure, well, happy people
Mm.
teaching this work. Not to say that there aren't, there absolutely are. But
Mm.
I saw a lot of dysfunction and a lot of kind of unhealed trauma and a lot of dysregulated nervous systems just kind of flying around in this very unregulated coaching space and then
Mm.
charging a lot of money for it and selling it and packaging up as it's kind of, we know that sex sells. Everyone
Mm.
wants more sex. Everyone wants better sex, right? So it's very easy to bundle it up
Mm.
and make it about that without any real substance and having never really been in a healthy relationship
Mm.
and think that that's going to be what's going to get like to me there's a lot of kind of this marketing
Mm.
BS behind it, right?
Mm.
And I'm all about academia, I'm all about science, and I've never seen any science to tell me that, doing tantra workshops is going to save your marriage. I just haven't.
Mm.
And I've also not seen much science to say that marriage counseling is going to be the thing to save it either, though, right?
Mm.
There's this kind of other work. I have seen science around shadow work,
Oh, for
absolutely,
sure. Yeah.
right? Seen tons of science on subconscious mind work. Yeah.
Mm.
Seen tons of science around being securely attached and how that helps. Yeah. Right. And so that's kind of what I follow.
Mm.
And not to say that the other stuff isn't powerful and wonderful. Like Existential Kink is one of my favorite
Mm.
books, right? But to me, yeah, I think we'll do that. But like, that's not polarity work to me. That's like
No.
deep therapy, deep psychology, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's totally depth psychology.
yeah, she's brilliant.
She is brilliant. And
Mm.
yeah, it's amazing, I guess, when those unmet needs show up in business and what have you. But all right, well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. I sticking to my own word, I did say we'd sort of cap this around now. So, what's the best place for people to learn about you, buy your courses, work with you, all of those sorts of fun things?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to hear me ramble about other stuff, you can listen to
Yep,
my podcast.
yep,
It's Katarina Polonska. It's called the Successfully in Love podcast.
cool.
You can find that on my website, so www.katarinapolonska.com. And
Mhm.
then if you want to get in touch, LinkedIn is actually the place I hang out the most and
Good
read
for
most of
you.
my messages. So yeah, drop me a line there.
Strictly
Mhm.
business. I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And
You're so
yeah,
welcome.
would love to have you on again sometime. It'd be great.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. My pleasure.